welcome. I am Kelly Scott. I'm the Executive Director of Clare House, and I'm thrilled to welcome you to the 2024 Community Conversation Series, a two-part event that we host to try to help the community open up more to conversation about living and dying well, and we really believe those things go hand in hand. Clare House is a home for terminally ill people. If you're not familiar with us, we provide care for people in their final weeks of life who need more help than what is available to them at home. They come and stay with us and spend those last days and weeks living as fully as possible, supported by our staff and volunteers, with their medical care managed by their hospice program. So it's a collaborative service with local hospices. We are completely free. Our care is a gift from the community. We've been around for 21 years now and taken care of over 6,000 people in that time. So we've kind of figured some stuff out about how to take care of people at the end of life. And we really, really believe that those lessons that we've learned are something that we can share with the community to help normalize these conversations. Talking about death is not easy, and a lot of people avoid it at all costs. But what we have learned through our experience at Clare House is those of us that are focused on the end of life in a way that helps us expand our living, really get a more full existence out of that. And that's one of the things that we have tried to focus on over the last 10 years, is taking what we've learned outside the building and sharing it with the community for all those people who are not a part of dying in our home and supporting a loved one as they die in a home, to be able to access some of those lessons. And that's what we're sharing with you tonight. Being able to have a conversation that feels comfortable, that does not feel threatening or scary in any way, but that it's just a normal conversation that we talk about. It's really easy for people to talk about their estate plans, a lot of times talk about their will, talk about the planning that they're doing and leaving a legacy financially to their loved ones. People are proud to talk about that. But a lot of us are just not comfortable talking about what we want in those last days and weeks and moments of life, and how we want that time to be, or if we're saying goodbye to someone, how we want to share that time. And so this is just an opportunity to get more comfortable with those conversations, and we're really glad that you're here with us to do that tonight. So this is my friend Jennifer.
Hello, everyone. My name's Jennifer Clark. I am a hospice and palliative medicine physician. I've been fortunate to serve Tulsa for almost 14 years, be this summer, but I've been practicing medicine for almost 25. I'm med peds trained. So for those of you who don't know what that is, I'm an internist and a pediatrician. And with my subspecialty, I've taken care of, as many of you've heard, my youngest patient has been 13 weeks utero. Oldest patient was 108 at Clare House about a year ago. I was really lucky, fortuitous, good divine plan, whatever you want to call it, to have moved to Tulsa and become part of the Clare House family almost from the moment I set foot on terra firma. And what you may not know is that Clare House and what we scientifically call the social model hospice home is a very, very unique gift that our community has. I remember moving here and thinking like, oh, it's just an inpatient hospice unit. Yeah, couldn't have been further from the truth. It recognizes that dying must happen in community. And when you talk to people who are at end of life, everyone wants to be in a home environment, ideally their own home. But oftentimes, as many of you probably felt directly or indirectly, caring for someone at home who is dying is not easy. The Medicare hospice benefit, so the insurance benefit that is called hospice, is developed with the idea that there will be a family and a network of people to care for you at home in order to receive those benefits. That happened in 1982, and as many of you know, we've had the diaspora of the family. We've become a mobile society, and people's family members and their network of people are lived in a virtual reality. There is nothing more real and more tangible than caring for someone who is dying. And so we fill that gap. We reach from the community to the healthcare system to bridge the chasm that is end-of-life care in the United States. And I couldn't be more proud to be part of the pioneering work that is happening out of Tulsa, Oklahoma. Clare House is part of the Omega Home Network. We decided to go see if there was anybody else doing this. We found a few people. And over a period of time, a handful of houses have now turned into a multitude of houses.
Over 100, 110, 115 homes across the country.
And we've just held our national conference in Indianapolis, where we had a plethora of new people invigorated in this work and understanding the importance of how death can inform not only end-of-life care, but a community on how to die well and how to live well, frankly. And, you know, Clare House being at the forefront of this grassroots movement, we're talking about the things that we're learning and how a death-informed, aware community lives and lives well. And so that's what our conversation will be about tonight. A little bit more practical. In your folders that were beautifully created by Brittany and handed out by our volunteer staff, you have a bunch of resources. Please take a gander. Couple important things. One, this is all grant funded. As Kelly said, our educational and clinical services are all done by the community, and most of that is done by feedback we get. So at the end of tonight, if you wouldn't mind filling out the survey, I'm saying that now because I always often forget. We'll probably repeat it at the end, hopefully. But please fill out the survey. It allows us to do this work. Second thing is that we've created a cheat sheet for you for the next 2 nights that shapes the 6 questions that we most get asked. So, and the bullet points that kind of go with it, so that you don't feel like you have to take notes, that you can be fully present in the room, take in all the information, and have a resource with which kind of gets the highlights. So, couple of resources, and we're getting really techie. Very excited about this. So, this is your opportunity to pull out your phone, get your resources, and then promptly either put it away or turn it off. So, these are 2 resources we'll be referring to that we will discuss kind of intermittently, indirectly or directly over the next couple of nights. The first one is How We Live is How We Die by the beloved Buddhist nun, Pema Chodron. And then this other one, many of you may not have seen yet, but it will shake the core of you should you choose to peruse it. This is a book called Lucid Dying that just came out at the beginning part of August by a physician that's up at NYU who studies what we now call recalled experiences of death. And we'll get into that science and what it's revealed next week. But we wanted to give you an opportunity to get a sneak peek of it before we get into the juicy meat of it. Okay? Everybody good? Okay. Phones away, off, whatever you want to do, just so you guys can be fully present. Okay. First question. Why is it taking so long?
This is absolutely one of the most common and normal questions for people to ask. That waiting, that sense of confusion of knowing that this end is coming, but there's no way to know when that's exactly going to happen, can be excruciating for people. I want to share with you a poem, and then we'll talk about it some more. It's called The Lingering by Tulsi Patel. Dying isn't always like a light bulb filament shattering, suddenly leaving one in an abyss of darkness. Sometimes it is full of waiting. like staring at a dewdrop crawling down a window. It is an odd feeling to sit with a sedated person, watching her decline anxiously, awaiting her departure patiently, lingering with her just as she lingers on earth. It is an even stranger thing to listen to the death rattle, the harsh gurgling of saliva and mucus when she is too weak to swallow. I try hard to treat it as background noise. I soothe myself. It's just like the static on an aging radio. In the meantime, before Thanatos forces open her hospital door and Karen demands an offering, it is enough for me, and probably enough for her, to rub her hands steadily, to comb hair gently, to sponge water drops onto her mouth carefully, to wipe away drool purposefully, to embrace the death rattle resignedly, and wait. It's really interestingly isolating in some ways to be in that situation and have no control, to not be able to schedule anything, including the rest of your life around that, and to simply bear witness, wait, watch, let the rest of life take a back seat while you are keeping vigil during that time. And different personalities are going to handle that in different ways. There's a lot to learn during that time if we can be open to it, but it really is pushing a pause button in the rest of our lives and giving up some control that I think is very, very hard for us. The presence is one of the most challenging things, I think, for people to not be wanting to be engaged with a screen in some way, to be on your phone, to have a TV playing, to be able to set that activity aside and be present in the moment is a challenge that I think makes it really hard in that bearing witness.
Yeah, I think bearing witness is one of the hardest things, and we'll take you guys through an exercise shortly. But we're so bombarded by the sensory systems of our modern day society. I mean, right here, right? Our nervous systems are so used to being stimulated by anything and everything that when we actually have time to just shift from being, the human doings that we are to the human beings that we are and actually be, many of us find we can't do it. There's a void, this urge, because our nervous systems are constantly demanding. I don't know, you guys have probably heard the molecule of more called dopamine, right? It's all over the internet nowadays, right? Oddly, paradoxically enough, if you're on the internet, your dopamine system's going crazy. And when we have a lack of it, there's this urgency to get more. So it's the molecule of more. And dying calls us to attend, calls us into the present moment. And many of us find the present moment wildly uncomfortable. But the funny thing is, that's the only thing that's really alive. It's the only thing that's real. Everything else is virtual. The past, the future, everything here, none of it's real. I mean, there's nothing more real than someone dying. And so I think that's one of the big things that caring for dying people teach us, is to be present and to attend. But it does require us to be a little uncomfortable in being fully present in the present moment.
one aspect of that I've always found really fascinating, and I've heard it multiple times from many people, including my own mother, is the elasticity of time when we're in that vigil process. And what a lot of people find in the midst of it is that it feels endless. It is never going to be over. Time is crawling. It's taking so long. I can't do it another day. I can't do it another hour. I can't do it another minute. And yet you have to keep going because there's no other option. And that sense of time being so prolonged and slow. And then the opposite feeling occurring once a death has occurred, and almost instantaneously shifting into this, oh my gosh, it was all over so fast. How can she be gone? It was just the blink of an eye that she was sick, and now she's gone. And this perception of time being so prolonged and so snapped short is just an amazing sort of dynamic, I think, that so many people go through. And the way you feel in one moment compared to the way you feel when the moment is gone are so very different.
Yeah. And we have to remember that death, and though being challenged now, as we'll see next week, we feel like feels very black and white, but it's very gray, actually. But dying is a process that takes a while. I mean, you're separating from this thing you've been carrying around for decades, right? And when we look at the physiology of dying, right? So all the things that we were just talking about, that it's pretty, you have to just practically speaking, thinking about someone going through the process, the last thing we want to do is hurry them through it, right? Arguably, dying is the most creative event of a human life. You don't want to hurry a creative process, if anybody knows what that's like, right? And so when we're dying, there's like anything that's worth its salt, it's not quite linear, but there is a process that occurs in every single human. Our nervous system is a receiver for what we call consciousness, right? Spirit in some languages, soul in some languages, Elan Vital in other languages, whatever you like to call it, S or self with a capital S. The thing that animates us is pulling away from the nervous system and the mind-body complex. And it does it in a sequential process to some extent, just like we process, information from bottom to top. We let go of our human brain, our mammalian brain, our reptilian brain, so that, it's no longer being received by this body of mind and can subsume back into wherever it originates from. We don't, in the scientific tradition, we don't know about that yet, as you will see next week, but we're getting really close. And what happens is that first and foremost, we withdraw socially from the world, right? So it's an odd thing, kind of time and space goes away, but also your relationship to the external world. So my relationship and all my identities, right? All the roles I've played.
Gathering up all that energy that I have invested in other people.
The external world, yeah. And as the social world and things get smaller and smaller, and this happens over months and weeks in many people, right? This is not a matter of days, hours, and minutes. Sometimes that happens, but for most people going through the natural dying process, it takes a long time. And so we socially withdraw, right? And get very narrow in our external engagement of the world. And then we start to sensory withdraw. Sight, sound, smell, taste, touch becomes very, very, very blunted because it's just too much to take in. As we are starting to clear out the noise of our lives, which is a lesson the dying can teach us, the clarity about who we fundamentally are and that essence of us starts shining through. And as a result, the sensory experience becomes really, really intense. And we have to pick and choose as to who and what and where we want to be. And if you talk to anybody, they don't want to be in a hospital with a lot of beeping sounds and noises in a foreign place with antiseptic smells and things like that. They want to be in those places that call to the core part of who they are.
But dying is not just about that person that is ill, that is going through that physical process and spiritual and emotional process. It's also about the ones that love that person and are surrounding that person. And so while that dying person is going through this withdrawal and really still doing a lot of work interiorly, it may not be visible to those in the room, to those at the bedside. And so it's very, very common for the observer, the loved ones, to then say they're suffering because they're not communicating, because they're not sharing their experience anymore. All this work is going on internally at an intellectual, spiritual, subconscious level, and that loved one doesn't understand what's happening. And I think a lot of times the gut reaction to that is they're just lying there, inert, suffering. And we overlay our own feelings of discomfort onto that experience and interpret it as suffering. And what do we think when we see someone suffering? We must bring it to an end. And so I also have heard hundreds of times over my 38-year career as a nurse is that we treat our animals better than we treat dying humans. We put them down when they get to this point. And people have a very difficult time seeing the value in this experience.
We now know with the studies of recalled experiences of death, and we'll get into the details of it next week, that what that internal, what looks like a sedated person is actually a profound, hyper-conscious, lucid state of absolute awe and wonder. Even if we're physically suffering, that is what we're told, is that as the consciousness is collecting itself from the external world and solidifying itself back into this body mind to let go of it, to separate, that's what is reported, is that the quietness that occurs in the kind of weeks, days, hours, and minutes prior to the event of heart-lung death, that is the traditional definition of death, that people are in this hyper-conscious state where they are experiencing the world vastly different than how you and I are experiencing it. And suffering is never, ever described as part of it. And so the frenetic nature that we can get into as we sit vigil, this discomfort, not only with not being, sensorily stimulated by the external world, but the emotional toll it has on what most people describe as helplessness, right? They feel like this person is suffering, I can't do anything about it. And the tension that brings, it's so overwhelming that oftentimes we see family members go into profound mood disorders. And for those of you who live with anxiety, which I fundamentally believe is the feeling of all things keeping you, right? You have all the feels, all emotions are going on, right? And then you have depression, which is nothingness, no feeling. And as humans, we don't do well on either end of that spectrum. And so helplessness oftentimes shoots us in either one of those directions based on kind of our proclivity towards either apathy, fear, and maybe even a little bit of anger. And so helping people really understand and how to be present, not only with this person going through this profound human experience, but also the discomfort that internally is going on with them, Because the wicked cool thing is, maybe, depending on your viewpoint, is that we're neurobiologically intertwined with each other, particularly those people we love or have been intertwined with in relationships like child, parent, spouse, whatever it happens to be. Our nervous systems are neurobiologically intertwined, so you get to have a taste of some of this if you allow the space for that to occur. And so teaching people how to be present at the bedside, giving into this time continuum that is expanding and contracting at any given time, and educating to what is happening and pointing to what is going on, and creating this space where the discomfort can be held so that they can be fully present and attend to their loved one and, as a result, to themselves.
I think this is where dying in community really can change an experience. The difference between being at home in a private home and being in a community space like Clare House, there's no good or bad, there's no judgment there, but they are very different experiences because being home alone, there's always times when you are on your own, and maybe you've got lots of family, maybe people are coming and going, but there are always these moments that come where something happens, you may not have support there, you don't know what to do, what choices to make, what decisions to make, physically what care needs to be provided, or if you can do that on your own. And that sense of isolation that often comes to people who are doing this care at home when there's not always somebody available to help them. It can make the experience feel so much more frightening, make you question, are you doing everything that you can, really creating a lot of self-doubt. And this sensation of being in community, dying in a community space is really different. And, even 50, 60 years ago, homes used to be like this all the time because they were multi-generational, and there were so many family members living together that people always had more resources. Now there are so many of us that are single, that our children have moved away, that we're spreading so far apart in our living arrangements that we just don't have the resources that we've had, and maybe we don't know our neighbors, we don't know our friends, all of these reasons why we don't have the resources that were available in generations past. And the ability to be able to have someone walk that path with you that hopefully has experienced it before and can interpret those physical changes, those emotional changes, be able to call out the markers that indicate progression as they're happening, can transform that experience.
Prognostication is wicked hard. As the hidden question in that is, how much longer, right? How much time do we have, right? And that's a really hard thing. It's something we actually aren't even taught in medical school. It's a art and a science that those of us who practice hospice and palliative medicine have been asked to learn kind of through apprenticeship if we're lucky enough to have teachers and things like that. And modern medicine, kind of for all it's good and all it's bad, has kind of made complications around that. And oftentimes we see people who have been engaging in proactive, pathogenic, kind of disease-oriented care, kind of begin the shift of palliation, meaning I'm not on any more surgeries. I don't want to be intubated any longer. IV antibiotics aren't interested. As my grandmother said, she's like, can you come up to Boston and get me off this merry-go-round? She's like, I'm done, kind of thing. And when we do that and we actually start caring for people in a whole way, oddly enough, we actually see them stabilize and somewhat improve before the beginning of the end. And so prognostication can sometimes be hard because families get themselves contorted around the idea of, okay, well, we're going to take the tube out, or we're going to stop the medicine, or whatever it happens to be, and they're going to die right away. And then weeks later, they're still with us and actually much more active than they had been in the months and years past. And so, it contributes to this kind of narrative. And so how do we help people adjust and flow with whatever we've got and the resources that we got and the blessing, or some people think it's a curse, to actually have more time. And so it's this space-time continuum that keeps coming up over and over again about how long do I need to endure this process that is so nonlinear. And yes, we're pretty good at guessing, but geez Louise, I'm only a human. I can only guess. And the way we talk about it is that everybody's got their road. Some people's roads are a little bit more twisty-turny and a little bit more or less obvious. And our job is to just make the road as clear as possible. But it's their road to hoe, and they're going to row it the way they need to. And our job is to make it as best as possibly can for them.
And deal with the myriad of emotions that we all feel during that time. Yeah. The grief that's happening every moment, but also the joy that we find when we do have those moments together. I think one of the things that gives people great happiness is when there's a rally, and that often happens in the very brief period of time before death, where someone comes fully back into themselves, even if they've been completely demented or unconscious. Then they have this rally and have moments of lucidity where they share memories and they share love and they share wisdom, and the gift that brings to someone it adds to this whole roller coaster of ups and down emotion that are happening throughout the process.
Yeah, and I'll add that grief, it can get really complicated, particularly if you have a tough relationship with the person that you're bearing witness to. I see all the heads going like this, right? Resentment, rage, anger, coupled with joy can be really that's the weirdness of grief, right? So grief is its amalgamation of all of those emotions, and if we don't feel grief, we cannot begin grieving. They are not synonymous. Grief is part of the loss, and if you don't feel grief, then incorporating that loss and grieving is not possible. And as we were just talking outside, grief's pretty persistent. It requires your attention, and it will wait, and it will insert itself most of the time in the most inconvenient of ways, in the most surprising of ways. And so, kind of one of the other big things is welcoming grief and knowing that people are safe to feel that tidal wave of all of those emotions, everything that we just talked about: rage, fear, anxiety, sadness, apathy, resentment, remorse, loneliness, shame. All of the things, right? And if we don't help someone who's dying with that process, we could interfere with the wholeness that needs to occur prior to death. And people who then are left behind have complex grief. They have hidden, kind of what we call shards left to kind of gather. And so it's really important that we help give people language, like conversations like this and the conversations we have in the home and elsewhere, to normalize these experiences so people feel safe in actually engaging with them. Because otherwise it becomes this hidden-filled, fear-filled experience that keeps revisiting us over and over and over again throughout our lifetimes. And so creating safe spaces like this where people can receive the language to prepare themselves and be present with others. Yeah. So we wanted to do something for you in hopes that you honor our mantra of paying it forward. That's kind of what we talk about at Clare House. Many of you have received some of our services and have paid it forward by being volunteers and things like that. But we're gonna offer you what we call a Tonglen practice, which is a compassion practice, which is what we do at the bedside. This is how we are with people. And so we're going to ask you to be the ones to receive tonight. So if you will, make yourself comfortable, right? Get your feet on the ground. Maybe put things that are on your lap, underneath your chair. When you're at the bedside with someone who is suffering, or what you perceive to be suffering, they can't speak to you. You don't quite know what to do. You feel a bit restless and concerned. This is a practice that you can offer them. I used to offer it to my children when they were sleeping. So just get yourself rested in a place of open-heartedness to receive. That might be hard for some of you. I just want to point that out. Receiving is a vulnerable place, but know that you are safe here with us, and we want to give you this gift. Some of you may want to close your eyes to be fully present in your body. Others, in order to be fully present, need to visualize something. So we have this gorgeous kaleidoscope available for you to focus on. So try to get yourself into the present moment, whether it's focusing on the beautiful colors, focusing on your breath, wherever you may feel it, at the nose, at the heart, in the belly. Or maybe you just need to kind of get in your seat literally and focus on your backside. But just be present. Please give me all of your fear. I take all of your fear so that it may be transformed into the love of safety, stability. Give me all of your anguish. Give me all of your rage. Allow me to transform that suffering for you, wishing you safety, stability, love. Give me all of your shame. Your loneliness. Your remorse. Know that you matter. Know that you belong. Hand over all of your ignorance so that as you go through this process, you come to know who you fundamentally are. Hand over your judgment. Curiosity abounds. It just waits for you. It wants you to find it. Your isolation is my isolation. Allow me to take that burden so that you may be fundamentally fully felt and bask in the entirety of compassion. Give me your longing. It is okay to not know, to take that leap of faith, to rest in the wisdom that lies ahead. Give me all of your suffering. I will hold it, transform it, so that you may be satisfied, that you may be whole. When you're ready, if you haven't already opened your eyes, maybe bring some movement back into your body. Deep breaths, maybe. Some of you may have to shake some things off. But hopefully that allows you to be. There's a lot of power in just being. We owe it to ourselves. We owe it to our loved ones. We owe it to those who are dying.
It is one of the hidden gifts in why is it taking so long to just be in that space, because we don't get that opportunity very often.
Very rare. The night's a little bit longer so that we can leave a little bit more room for questions. And we're going to break up the question and answers a little bit. We just gave you a lot of information. Curious, any comments or questions that we can attend to about the question, why is it taking so long, or how much longer is it going to be?
First off, I commend you for asking the question, because I think that's one of the things that the loving person rather than the dying person isn't as self-aware to say, is touch good for them or is it just good for me? And that balance of what's good for me and what's good for this other person is really important.
So just to repeat the question, so Claudia, and let me make sure I got this right. As being present with someone who's dying, words tend to come quite easily, right? But it becomes a question of, when does touch come into play? And the confusion around that, the mystery around that, when is it okay, when is it not okay, and interacting in that way. Is that kind of what I'm, okay. I'll add, based on the science of recalled experiences of death, is that is all about intention. What is your intention? So you have to get really clear about when you're at the bedside, because people are in a hyper-conscious state. They can actually feel intention and emotion and thoughts and stuff much more readily. So your intention is really important to get clear upon, particularly if you are laying hands in any way, shape, or form. So that would be my 2 cents, is that it's totally fine to participate in sensory experiences, sight, sounds, taste, touch, smells with people who are dying, but you have to be very, very clear about the intent of it, right? A lot of it is, I want to relieve my own distress, so I'm going to be doing something to relieve my own distress, and it's not focused on the person that's at hand. So getting really clear about what the intention is, I think, would be my 2 cents about that. But yes, I would applaud you for not being afraid, right? So.
And I would also add, as part of being aware of that intention, is understanding that the dying person's job is dying, and it's no longer attending to an exterior relationship. And that's a really hard thing for a loved one to accept and let go of, is that this person can't take care of me anymore. They're not giving anymore. And you have to understand what you're asking for. And if you're asking for this person to be caring for you or doing something for you versus going through the interior experience and all that's going on that we can't see, it can be distressing.
Yeah, so intention is very important. What else? Yeah, so Kathy, right, has asked, as we're sitting with someone, how do we know that they've shifted into that state? So they'll tell you. Their bodies will tell you. They'll tell you about the experiences they're having. Many people don't look like themselves. Their facial features are letting go of the personality that has been in this body mind, and so they don't hold their face the same way. They don't use the same language. There's much more universal language and things like that when they move into this hyper-conscious state. They may talk about seeing angels or loved ones or the green little dude over in the corner, whatever happens to show up. So it's a subtle shift sometimes, but that shift it becomes more and more obvious if people are paying attention. And that's a lot of what we do, is actually help people pay attention to, oh, hey, did you experience this today? What did you see today? We just had a guest at the house who was like, her visions were like a portal would open. So she could see Clare House around, but then a portal would open and she would go visit like her childhood home or like her mom's house. Or she was like, and how do I close this thing? Because I don't want to be around my mom. So they're starting to see what we call the veil lifting. We have pre-programmed parts of our brain where we can't take in sensory experiences because we get too overwhelmed. Oftentimes because we don't have language about it. We talk about transcendent experiences and flow and all sorts of different things. They are in a conscious, like a flow state almost entirely, and that's intense to do. And so you'll see it in their body minds, you'll see it in their language, you'll see it in the things that they talk about. And then unconsciousness, when they become unconscious, that's a internal hyper-conscious state. Aaron, do you have anything to add to that? Yeah. So the question was, is this hyper-conscious state different depending on the person and their disease process? So dementia would be one. People with traumatic brains would be another one, right? People with traumatic brain injuries, so like people who are in a persistent vegetative state or have some sort of, altered state of consciousness where their interaction with their environment is different. It's hard to know. They're studying the dementia patients right now, because what we do know about dementia patients that's different than traumatic brain injuries or cerebral palsy or other organic brain issues is a thing called terminal lucidity. So we've actually, last year we talked about a case, but we see this quite frequently, where someone who's had dementia for decades, severe dementia, there's lots of different types. There's Alzheimer's dementia, vascular dementia, Lewy body dementia, senile dementia, so on and so forth. That as a person turns inward and starts recollecting its full consciousness, in many dementia patients, in the moments, usually the hours and days and hours prior to the event of heart and lung death, that they may have a period where they are fully intact again, where they know who they are, they know their family members, they have their memories, they're able to share these profound experiences. And so a lot of the work we're doing is creating environments and context for the possibility for that to arise and educating people to that. We do know from recalled experiences of death that traumatic people who die traumatic deaths and actually come back actually also experience this. So the whole space-time continuum goes away. So they still have this kind of hyper-conscious state. But because we have people who are nonverbal prior to the process, it's hard to know kind of what their experiences are. But I will tell you, there's so much science now. I mean, hundreds, if not thousands of people have given this testimony to this experience of a hyperconscious state, regardless of what creed, culture, background is, that it seems to be a universal experience, even if we can't talk about it. I like to think that. So trying to understand that and really prepare people for that, I think is really important. Should I gather my family?
When is it time to make that phone call? Whose responsibility is it?
I don't want to tell anybody.
Can you call? This whole idea that somehow the one family member at the bedside is supposed to be responsible for making sure that everybody else gets there in time, whatever that means. It's so much pressure. It's such a burden to put on a primary caregiver that is so deeply involved in care, and yet somehow they're supposed to be responsible for taking care of other family members and friends' feelings as far as how they want to spend their last visit and when they want to be present and in the progress towards death. So I think it is a really, really common question. I think hospice staff get asked this question all the time. You know, should I call my brother? Should I call my sister? Is it time to gather people? It's an impossible responsibility for one person to bear. And I think that is the message that we give most often is, it's not your job, man. It's not your job. You know, you can give people information and they can make their own decisions. But to be able to free people from feeling responsible for getting everybody there in time and meeting all these other emotional needs it's just such a relief to be able to say that. I think it's important to ask questions like, well, it depends. What do you want? Do you want to see them? Do you want to talk to them again? Do you want to be able to have a conversation? Do you want to just simply be present? Do you want to be present at the time of death? Do you want to be present at the funeral? If you can only take 1 week off work, what's your priority? Is it funeral and time with the family afterwards? Is it having a conversation with someone while they're still lucid? There's so much that goes into this decision, and it's just so much to layer onto the person at the bedside.
Yeah, that's why we put the very practical kind of, these are the 3 things I say to people. I was like, do you need to say goodbye? Do you need to have closure where you eyeball to eyeball, say side to side, say something to somebody? Come now. Don't wait, because we don't know when they're going to go into this hyperconscious state and not be able to talk to you, right? Do you have something that's unresolved? Come now, for the same reasons, right? If someone has said, I've said my goodbyes and things like that, they're like, there's this, as we'll get to in a second, there's a lot of shoulds in weird myths around dying, like Norman Rockwell, as we'll get to here in a second, that somehow everybody needs to be singing hymns around mom's deathbed. And I've seen that once, I think, in my 25 years. And so, so there's a lot of images that people have that we have to debunk about gathering. And so it's like, is it more meaningful than to be in grief with a collective grief for the funeral, and that's where you spend your time. And so really helping, it's those 3 things, right? Do you need to say goodbye? Is there something to be resolved, or do you need to be here in grief in community with your family? That typically helps people kind of guide down pathways. But if they're asking the question, my first answer is, I'm going to tell you yes, because you'll never get this opportunity back again, and the burden someone has you sure don't want to be walking around with people pointing fingers and blaming you because you didn't call on time, right? So we try to unburden people, and we would ask you to not burden your family members. And if you end up being that person, to kind of be like, hey, that's not my business. I'm telling you what's going on. You're more than welcome to come anytime, you know, because there is some sort of stigma, as we'll get to, about, oh, I wasn't there when the event of death occurred. Dying is much more important to be a part of, right? Because by the time someone's, you know, approaching the gray zone of death, they're totally inward focused and letting go of this world, right? It's being present with them during dying that ends up having a significant more impact. So,
and the bottom line is, you just never know.
You don't.
As much as we teach the milestones, as much as we share those milestones with people, death generally unfolds in a very similar process, regardless of the disease process that person has. People die mostly in the same way over time with these gradual changes, and then there are always situations where you walk in a room and someone's gone, and you had no idea it was coming. You didn't see the changes. It just happened. So that's always a possibility, and nobody has any control over that. It's part of the mystery.
Yeah, the reason why we have this up is because when I get asked this question, the very first thing that pops into mind is that far picture, which is, these are the 4 freedoms, if you guys don't know this, from Norman Rockwell. So this is freedom from fear, freedom for worship, freedom from speech, freedom to gather. And so people have this notion that I'm supposed to have this beautiful, you know, gorgeous Thanksgiving dinner-esque like death. And death is really friggin' messy and unpredictable and silly and hard and not a pretty painting like that. And so we try, when people ask the question of, you know, do I gather my family? We, again, back to the whole idea of intention. What is it that you're going to need? What, you know, kind of anticipating what complexities in grief that you may have if you don't have a chance to say goodbye, if you don't have a chance to resolve issues, or if you're unable to gather with people in collective grief as a family. So, so let go of the shoulds, you know, let go, you know, kind of start questioning kind of really what this looks like, and know that it's not always really pretty, but it can be wildly meaningful and very personal and extraordinarily intimate and often very, very transcendent. So,
and a challenging piece of it also is the realization that everybody has the right to do this their own way.
Yeah.
And so part of the shoulds is not putting shoulds on other people, that I'm here, I want to be here for every moment of this, but you're not. And maybe that other person doesn't have that need or desire, and they're comfortable letting it unfold without them there, and that they have the right to make that choice as well. You know, we may feel like they're going to regret it, but everybody gets to do it their own way.
On that note, I couldn't get through an entire night not talking about Brene Brown. Huge fan. So some people have heard this before, but understanding the emotion of resentment, which is what she was talking about, right? So oftentimes people think resentment's actually in the anger family, but what her research shows is resentment's in the jealousy and envy family. You are envious that this person doesn't feel the need to be at the bedside. Right? When I first heard that, I was like, dude, oh, good Lord. Resentment's about me. Resentment's about my own envy or jealousy. So we oftentimes talk to people about that. You know, why is it that you feel like they need to be here, and why do you need to be here? And figuring out what their intention is and helping them shift some of those more less malleable emotions, not less important, but just less malleable. And so, you know, to Kelly's point, instead of the shoulds, allow for the freedoms, allow for the freedom to explore, to feel that curiosity, to be present, you know, and allowing the story to unfold in its natural course. So
Let's get to the last question.
last question. Why did Mom wait till I left the room?
I sat there for days. I never left for days. I was stinking and I had to leave to take a shower. And
We all
that's
just went
when
to
it
go get a
happened.
cup of coffee. Good Lord. We call this the matriarch phenomenon. It's got a name. Okay? There's lots of reasons for this. The most common one is anybody who has been a caregiver of a young child. When you have moments where you're not playing the caregiver role, whether it's mother, grandmother, father, whomever, whatever, you're in charge of a small child, they're attached to you literally or figuratively all the time until they're about 8 to 9 years old. I mean, I remember the day where I was not like thinking about my kid for the first time. I was like, whoa, that's really weird. But the most important thing is that going to the bathroom became like sacred, right? The door is shut. Nobody else is in here. You're in your playpen for 15 minutes so I can go to the bathroom, right? Mothers, the same kind of thing. I'm dying. I kind of want to do this on my own. Not with you in here. So can you please turn tail? Right? So it's a little bit of privacy. It's a little bit of this is my time. A little bit of that. We hear that a lot. The other piece that we often hear is I don't want my children to see that. I don't want them. There's a belief that my child would suffer seeing the mess of me dying.
It's a final act of protection.
Right. And then the other part of that is if you're there, you're there. If you're not, you're not. It does not speak to whether or not you matter, whether or not you're important, whether you've earned the spot, whether you're the golden child, what all the things that we have heard. It has nothing to do with that. By the time someone's dying, they're in a hyper-conscious state. And they are in a state of imbued love without all the accoutrement of being human. And so the intention is pure. So if you're not there, there was an intention by which that occurred. And just honor that.
It does not negate all the hours that you sat at the bedside and bore witness and kept vigil. If you miss that final moment, so be it.
It was meant to be that. I mean, it sounds, I don't want it to sound like a euphemistic slap by any stretch of the imagination. But when we know that the person is in a hyperconscious, lucid state where intention is pure and there's not all of this stuff, it allows for an acceptance and a compassion in that. So, yeah. Yeah. So the question for those of you who didn't hear, is it appropriate to leave the room? On a weekly basis, when
we encourage
we
it.
tell people, that's actually why we built the house the way it is, and is actually part of the social model hospice homes, is that we have communal spaces. So people are present in the building, but aren't doing the Norman Rockwell hypervigilant over the body at all times, kind of thing. So you're there, but not there.
And sometimes people get stuck. They literally seem like they're stuck, and there's no conceivable reason physiologically to understand why someone is still drawing that next breath. And that's one suggestion we might make is, why don't you step out? Give them some space, give them some privacy, and why don't you step out? So many times, people will die while their hospice aide is giving them a bath. The family's out, they've gone to take a shower, they've gone to get a meal, whatever it is, but maybe they're in there with the aide, maybe they're in there all by themselves. But we encourage, especially when somebody seems like they're stuck, we encourage people to step out.
Yes. So the question is, has anybody vocalized, right? Made some sort of proclamation that was dying that said, I only want these certain people around to know. They've made preferences and suggestions about who needs to be there and who doesn't. And then you have someone call and say, well, why didn't you call me? Yes, that happens. We encourage people to have that conversation prior to. Right. So it's not left with, it's, similar to kind of what we talked about of the gathering question, is if there is a clear wish for the dying person and who and what their dying environment looks like, and then they need to communicate that. Yes. Yeah. The more and more people have mortality salience in conversations like this, more people are thinking about who I would want there, what sensory experience do I want, kind of where do I want to be, and living a life now and having those conversations now so that that comes to fruition. If you think all that magic is going to happen just because you're dying, yeah, good luck with that. You need to start living in such a way, to Pema's title, right? And having those conversations now. And
it's a really interesting exercise to do now. At our retreat in the spring, we did this exercise where we drew our deathbed and who was around us and who was present, what physical things were around us, what it looked like, and to just do that as an exercise and really put yourself in that space and imagine what you want during that time can be pretty eye-opening. And if you do that with a friend, with a family member, and walk through that yourself and be able to articulate it to someone, I think it's pretty profound.
Yeah, I mean, it's context and content, right? So whenever you look at a creative act, and if we think of death as the most creative act, all we can do as humans is create the context by which the best outcome for us will occur. The creativity will kind of unfold, and it requires context making. And if you don't have any idea about the context, how do you, it has no container by which the creativity can occur. So, living your life now creates the context by which your death then will occur. And so starting with the end in mind, it makes it a whole lot easier to kind of say, okay, what matters most? So.
Thank you for coming out and putting yourself in a space for a difficult conversation. Hopefully it can feel more comfortable.
Yeah. We'll be here to answer questions if people have them. I know we've got some introverts in the room that are like, I can't ask that question in front of all of the people. So we'll be here for a while, and then obviously we'll be here next week to have the wrap up of the series. Thank you for coming. See you next week.